welcome to False Flag, the podcast made to cut through the propaganda and doublespeak and empower a grassroots activism, and most importantly, to take back a government of and for the people.
Well, as you guys know, it's been a couple of weeks since our last chance to get together, and we've been doing some research. And my approach is different than yours, but I want to talk during this podcast about how the current workplace has been a 40-year deliberate action, not only of the Republican Party, but even the Democratic Party, in limiting workers' rights and dismantling the current workforce. Because we can all remember what work was like in the 70s of our grandparents, our parents, and the middle class, and where it is today. It's totally disrupted. And I know you have studied and read The Rise of the Robots. We want to get into automation, so I don't want to dominate this, but I do find some historical precedents that we can reflect back on during the robber barons and the industrial age that are also in place today. So, number one, history repeats itself. Okay, so we all know that 100 years later, we're facing the same thing that was faced during the industrial age. You know, and two things that came out of that helped was your muckrakers and the unions. And I'm a member of IWW, Industrial Workers of the World, which was one of the first ones that started with the anarchists that left Europe and came over to America. But the thing I like about IWW, it was not tied to a skilled trade position. It was individual people unionizing where they worked versus being a teamster that would drive a truck, or AFL-CIO, you know, or the electricians union. You know, those were specific for those. IWW has always had, you know, this up and down chart of successes, but in the last 10 years, IWW has helped unionize not only Burgerville, Starbucks, and they're working on, I think it's called Stardust Dinner Theater on Broadway. So IWW is really helping individuals unionizing it. And I think IWW, DSA, and other progressive groups are the routes to change this. So let's get into this. I know that you're the one that tied me into Friedman. So tell me about what you know about Milton Friedman and what he did.
Unfortunately, you know, I don't know that much about him. I haven't really researched him. I only know, you know, some of the fragmented material that I've read in articles or, you know, years ago or something. But it seems to me like I remember that he had a new way of looking at the economy back in I think the early 70s. And it was so revolutionary and new that he you know, became famous for it and had a lot of followers and all. And it seems to me like up until that time, many small businesses or entrepreneurs or capitalists had a kind of a sense of a social responsibility. They had to keep their workers happy. Like Ford started paying everybody $5 an hour, that type of thing. And it was up to the individual CEO or the board that had this responsibility for social justice, what we could call that now. And he got this idea, I believe, that was not necessary or even desirable for large industrialists or capitalists. And that was, you know, just not part of what their plan should be, and they should take care of the stockholders and the stockholders only.
Right. And up to that time, because of the unions that came out of the robber barons in the industrial age, you had union protection on jobs.
Well, yeah, unions were much bigger back then, but there were, I know from personal experience.
His theory.
Right.
It started going back to the top 10% capitalists owning worldwide conglomerates.
Yeah, regardless of social problems or environmental problems.
Now, some background information on Milton. He was born in 1912. He died in 2006. In 76, he was the Nobel Peace Prize winner for economic science. And his theories on modern workplace really changed after his series got published. And he was also an advisor to Ronald Reagan. And a lot of things from Reagan forward really changed.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, and so you see his input in there. And I know you want to say something, but let me just get back to this at the beginning because I think it's very important. I subscribe to a magazine called Dissent. Dissent is a great magazine. And Sarah Jaffe is an author and journalist, and she said it best in the winter 2017 article. She says, as we stare down the barrel of a Donald Trump presidency, the future looks grim for labor. Our new president is a racist billionaire with decades of experience in the art of screwing workers. We've read hundreds of these stories, such as the automation and whether it's going to happen and how it's going to affect the workers, and we know how they go. But the thing that Sarah Jaffe says is this, and I'm quoting her, but the thing they all seem to gloss over is the question at the heart of the section, the question of politics. And this is so true. That's the end of her quote. And this is where I come in with my thoughts, you know, from working with the Bernie campaign and with you working the Occupy movement. We have seen these two movements with grassroots people really trying to affect changes. So the times are there again as it was, and we do have to look at politics because it is through politics that changed the current workplace.
You talk about Reagan and changed everything. Reagan took most of his cues from Margaret Thatcher, and during that time, Margaret Thatcher said, "There's no such thing as society." It basically saying that, you know, look, we're all out for ourselves. And you know, Reagan, with one of his first things he did was try to bust the unions. He busted the air traffic controllers. Mm-hmm. That was huge. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's why most of the Republicans I know, they deify Reagan. I mean, that man can do no wrong.
Yeah. Him and I have both seen a movie called How My Father Was Brainwashed.
Yes.
And it's a great movie because it talks about this Republican advisor during the Nixon years came up with a plan to how to shift society to an ultra-conservative mindset. And that was through media. And this is where your news talk format really grew out of. Now, why is this important? You have to look at where it started and where we are today has been a 40-year plan by the Republicans to change the workforce. And all their money, their lobbyists and everything, I mean, everyone always says, you know, you go to Washington flat ass broke, but by the time you leave, you're a fucking millionaire. You know? And that's because of the lobbyists. And even the new legislation stating that businesses are people. Bullshit. They ain't people. You know, the people are being screwed. And which goes back to why unions became strong during the robber barons. It will be through the unions and the grassroots movement uniting and overthrowing the system.
I'm going to throw this out here that a lot of people that I've talked to, they have no idea that the biggest media company in the world right now is Facebook. Most people get their news from Facebook. Facebook's algorithms, it shapes, it's the birds of a feather mentality. If through their little robots, or not really, their software bots, they sense that you are a conservative bent or liberal, whatever bent. When they upload pictures to Facebook, they tag them with certain, is this a funny conservative, funny liberal, and then they will shape what your Facebook feed sends you. And you couple that with something like 40% of Americans right now get their news mainly from Facebook. And so you get an echo chamber effect,
right,
to where you referenced the book, how my dad was brainwashed. I've not saw it, but you've talked about it. And it's one of the things is that you get an echo chamber effect. You look at all the major Fox networks, or like Fox. And, and again, I'm not picking sides. MSNBC does the same thing. It's almost like they have talking points. If the president does a certain speech and it's crazy, then that's what all this particular news groups, that's how they'll lead it off. And if you're watching Fox and Friends and Breitbart and what's another one, just it gets reinforced. You get reinforced. Yeah. And it's the same way if you watch the Young Turks and the Huffington Post, and it's just, you get so tunnel vision, like, why can't anybody see it's right in your face?
But take that further. Even though I belong to the Democratic Socialists of America, I believe in democratic socialism, and I've studied a lot about, from the Marxist socialism, communist socialism. Democratic socialism is different, democratic socialism. In fact, there's a great book written by I'll think of his name, John Nichols. And I met him in Chicago during the People's Summit. And he wrote The S Word. And he really looks at, from the time of the signers of the Constitution to where we are today, we have always had democratic socialism without using that word. Sure. It's been there. Mm-hmm. It's of the people, by the people. And look at what Lincoln said. But here's the point, is you have the top 10% capitalists. And when I refer to capitalists, I'm talking about that upper 10%. I'm not talking about the theory of capitalism, because you have to have some form of capitalism. I get it. Okay? But this wage and the money has just, it's so much inequality. But the top 6 news outlets, media conglomerates worldwide, are the owners of every TV station, radio station, print magazines, movie studios. Those 6 companies format what the fuck we watch and hear. So they're feeding us. And it's crazy. If you don't know that, you need to step back and research it and look at it, because it is true. And we have to see that what you put in is what you get out. So a lot of the complacency that I think that is in America is because of all this bullshit that has been force-fed through us in the last 30 years.
2 things on that. Totally agreeing with you. It got out last year that the United States government hired Facebook, gave them something like a couple $100,000, or maybe $100,000, it's a lot of money, to let them have control over the news feeds of a certain group of people, just a random group. And what they did, they were seeing if there's a correlation between what they were sending, what the people were seeing on the news feeds, to what their moods were. You always do the status symbol.
Interesting. Yeah.
The scary thing.
And there was a correlation.
Yes, there was a correlation.
And before that, Harvard Psychology Department entered into a paid agreement, and they watched people's statuses by giving them all negative news for a day and seeing how they responded with their own personal posts.
Yes. The scary part is Facebook let them do it. And didn't announce it even after it was done. It got leaked, thankfully.
Yeah.
Now, another thing you said, yes, capitalism, what was it? Who said the
When I refer to capitalists, I'm talking about the upper 10%. When I talk about capitalism, I'm talking about the theory that you have to have some form of capitalism. I'm not against ownership of businesses, individuals in a free market, okay? And, yes, I remember as a kid reading Ayn Rand. I kind of get her theory, but it's...
I've read her too, and I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, all right. But, being a rebel back in the 70s, she was one of the authors that, you wore on your shoulder.
But she got really hammered on in the Soviet Union.
Oh, I know. But all I'm saying is, you do have to have some free market. But here's the deal. Here's the problem. Even in buzzwords, we use words without questioning the person what they really mean by their understanding of that word. We take for granted our own filters on what we hear. You have to engage in communication because when I've said, I'm against the capitalist, you have said, well, I think that, individuals have a right to start their own business. Well, I'm not talking about that. So that's why now I qualify. When I say capitalist, I'm talking about the upper 10% worldwide.
Well, let's not worry about the upper 10%. In the United States, 40% of the people own nothing. And I'm not talking like infants or anything. I'm talking about the 40% of working adults have no control over any assets. And there's even a percentage of that have negative. And you could argue, well, if you're 22-year-old and you have a $120,000 mortgage, you have negative. That's been accounted for in the thing. I mean, you have something like 40% of the working people in the United States are working poor. One paycheck and they're gone. Mm-hmm. Going back to we've always had socialism. Yes, it was I don't know if you guys ever heard of Benjamin Franklin. You ever heard of that guy? He invented the $5 bill. Or what? No,
yeah.
20, is it 50?
50, I think.
I'm going to edit that part out.
He invented that one, yeah.
I don't know if you ever heard of Benjamin Franklin, but he's the guy who invented the $50 bill. And
he's a shocking man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back then,
especially with kites.
Back then, you bought into a fire service.
Oh, yeah, right.
So, yeah.
And the other guys would let it burn.
Yeah. Your house was on fire, and you didn't buy this particular service. Yeah, your house burned.
Yeah.
But the problem is that that's not a smart ideal, because
no.
So Benjamin Franklin started the thing of like, no, let's pool our resources, a small percentage from everybody, and our cities don't burn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no.
That's socialism, isn't it?
That is socialism.
I remember when the Zeitgeist movies first came out on the internet, and it was interesting to hear. The thing that I don't like about Zeitgeist movies is there's a lot of fucking facts thrown at you, but there's no fucking bibliography for you. You have to just really dig, And one thing about our podcast, is once it's uploaded, we're also going to have a call to action and a PDF file with all these links and things so you can research it yourself. Don't take our words, but we're here to open your eyes to the false flags that are out there. And the founding fathers never wanted a national banking system. They knew what happened in England. And you were the one that told me the original incorporation of businesses had what?
They had to have public
end date.
Oh, yeah, they expired. The charters expired, and it had to be in a public service.
And look at how far we've grown away from that. Our founding fathers gave us the tools for a democratic socialist country, and we fucked it up.
Yep.
The military, the military, which essentially was the Navy, because you had local militia for the Indian population and such, but the Navy was funded only by dock fees, tariffs.
Yeah.
So they had to keep the sea lanes open, or they didn't get funded.
Yeah. And
now we've got Kim Jong-Trump in office, who wants to spend another, $56 billion on our military is bigger than everybody else's combined by a factor of, 3? It's amazing. And a little factoid that I may or may not edit it out, the little factoid about a military is that you look at the military budget, that's not the entire military. The Department of Interior covers the bases. NASA launches most of NASA's budget is private military.
Oak Ridge Laboratories down in Tennessee is government owned, and that's where they develop a lot of weapons and things that are harmful.
Our ultimate, as always, the reason we have a military, or we should have a military, it's not so much for defending us from Canada, because they're really nice people, but it's to keep the sea lanes open for trade. Mm-hmm. It allows us to sell Coke in Zimbabwe.
Right. Okay. Now, I want to interrupt here but I want you to kind of answer what I'm asking. Is the news media is the tool of the military-industrial complex to feed the American public these things? We have to have weapons against ISIS. We have to have weapons against Kim Jong in North Korea.
No, the Iron Mountain.
Okay, so
we have to have an enemy. Peace doesn't work.
Yes. I mean, the whole deal about we need this is a false flag, because we're the ones that have created this monster image of the world that it's not out there.
Well,
it's not out there.
Even if you take terrorism against United States citizens worldwide last year, like 100 people. How many cars did Vioxx kill? I mean, not how many cars. How many people did Vioxx kill? How many car wrecks? How many people got drunk at a bar and run off the road and killed somebody?
With Facebook,
and we don't spend billions of dollars trying to get people home safely from bars. We spend trillions of dollars to protect us from Mohammed.
Okay,
there's a reason for that.
Well, I know
that's a lie.
Yeah.
That's a lie. That's a false flag, because this is reality, and I think I'm right on this. And you guys tell me if I'm right or not. If you take 1,000 Russians that just show up on Long Island and start working towards and killing and destructing and trying to take over, I guarantee you, people texting, getting on Facebook, they couldn't even get to the New York borders by the time they're rubbed out by the people.
Yamamoto knew about that.
Yes, yes. And we knew about that too.
So what is this fear? What is this fear? It's driving our budgets and things, as you say, open the sea lanes for cocaine. I mean, goddamn.
I was actually talking about Coca-Cola, but yeah.
It's the petrodollar.
It's the same thing, too.
It's the U.S. dollars coming out of Britain.
The reason we had weapons of mass destruction was to get the oil. We didn't go over, first of all, to take over Saddam. The first place our military landed was the goddamn oil fields.
One more thing, too.
But you were getting ready to say something, too.
Well, wait. Go ahead.
As far as, okay, we need enemies because we have a war economy. Our economy is based on war. We need enemies. However, there was, at the end of World War II, the United States was the top dog, and we had the thing called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which made all commerce all around the world done in U.S. dollars. That's why we're not terribly poor today, because all commerce around the world is based on U.S. dollars, which is based on treasury bonds sold to those countries who want to trade with us. And in the 70s, Nixon went over to Saudi Arabia and made an agreement with them that all oil sold anywhere, traded anywhere in the world would be done in U.S. dollars, backed up by treasury bonds. And so, when you have somebody somewhere in the world who wants to get off of the dollar economy because it's based on debt and they know it, and the treasury bonds are worthless, so they want to get on some other method of commerce for their oil, if they're oil producers and exporters.
Look at bitcoins. What did our government do with
let's say, for instance, over in Iraq, that Hussein wanted to get Libya. Yeah, they wanted to get off the dollar standard. Bad things happen to people like that. That is why we have a strong military, because we have to enforce the selling of treasury bonds.
The fucking capitalists.
That if we let somebody get off of treasury bonds, our economy sinks the day afterwards.
Why did we invade Hawaii? Because the sugar plantation owners wanted the fucking money from the sugar in Hawaii.
And so we have
they invented, Hearst helped the Navy invent that there was this like civil war happening that we had to rescue them. Talk about a false flag.
Haiti.
So it all boils down to the money.
Yeah.
Our money, not any money, U.S. dollar money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we need all these enemies, boogeymen, because our economy is based on war. If we gave up war, we wouldn't have an economy.
Yeah. Look at Tinkerfield. I don't know how this podcast goes, but if you look at a map of Oklahoma City, about 3/4 of it is an Air Force base.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to back up just for a minute.
Yeah.
Because all this applies to some current things. I want to go back into history. And let's talk about the Muckrakers. Okay? You had these early writers such as Helen Hurst Jackson and Ida B. Wells, but also during that time, which was really strange, Randolph Hearst used his papers also to talk about the corruption that was going on. Because, I mean, for him, it sold papers. You know, he wasn't a true muckraker. You had Mother Jones. You had Upton Sinclair, who was one of the original writers of muckraking information. And I found this real interesting when I was researching it. There was a guy by the name of Samuel S. McClure that started a magazine called McClure's. And it was nothing but writings of the muckrakers that was distributed to people. Okay? So what did the government do? They began getting with the government employees and saying, do not deliver these magazines to the people. Or let's charge them X amount of money to where, you know, they can't get the special rate for mass mailings. You know, so the government tried to stop them. Eventually, McClure became bankrupt and he had to sell his company, and they turned it into a home and garden magazine. Okay? You look now at how the government, we've had successful protests from Black Lives Matter, Occupy, the Bernie people, you know, the anti-DNC crowd, you know, Bernie's group is now called Our Revolution. You have DSA, you have the International Socialists too that also do protests. You have all these groups that are now protesting. Well, ALEC is now introducing bills in 18 different states to limit social protesting and to not only charge people high fines such as $10,000 if things get out of hand, but also to even prevent them from starting social protest. So let's go back in history and see that the muckrakers, yes, opened up the door of information and helped people move to stop the corruption in Washington, but then the big capitalists came in and shut them down. Okay? We're seeing that right now. And if you do not realize what's going on in current day politics, they are shutting down. What has Trump done? He has banned certain news media from showing up. He wants to create a list of crimes that immigrants have committed. Oh my God, what did fucking Hitler do? He created a list of crimes that Jews had done. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now,
and they're heavily involved in the media. The media is lying to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, all this, there are so many false flags out there. You have to do your research. So, the current muckrakers, you have the Young Turks, you have Democracy Now! And we're even finding during the Atlanta Black Lives Matter deal, I got better news from tuning in and watching some cat in the middle of it doing a Facebook Live deal than I did watching CNN News.
Did you hear about the law that passed or about to pass or has passed in Arizona?
Yes.
About the if there's a riot and property damage happens,
forfeiture of assets.
The rioters or the people who started the riot or financed it in some way or had something to do with it.
The organizers.
The organizers. Now they're liable for any damages and fines and stuff. Well, okay, you've got like the Milo protests at Berkeley. That was a very peaceful protest, and then these black hooded people come in, started throwing stuff through windows, busting stuff up, setting stuff on fire, and they ran away. there's still some debate on who they were. So let's just say you're the government and you got a whole bunch of people out there that's giving you problems, and you got a peaceful protest heading towards the Capitol that the optics don't look good. How hard it is to get some thugs out there and start breaking glass? Now you can come in there with billy clubs and basically do a massive tax on anybody that spoke out.
Actually, I think that's pretty routine already.
Yeah.
Going back to Sarah Jaffe, I want to kind of reel this back in for conclusion and wrap up. We started with Sarah Jaffe, the author, and she says the income inequality gap is higher now in our society than any other generation in history. And Rebecca Burns says it's much easier to predict the future when you have the power and money to shape that. So what am I saying about looking at history, looking at the capitalists? Right now, our laws are being dictated by the upper 10% capitalists, the businesses. We're passing laws that infringe upon our First Amendment. The concept of America, of the people, by the people, for the people, is no longer applicable. And all these other things, you have to look at the false flags and go beyond that and see the truth. We have to organize. We have to educate. We have to help people wake up. But the subgroups that are the protesters, that are wanting progressive change, have also got to learn to communicate with each other. Because if you don't, then you just have a Black Lives Matter event that mostly, African Americans show up. But if all these other progressive groups that don't want the African American community to be targeted and their rights usurped, then instead of having 10,000 people show up, you can have 1 million people show up because of all these other groups that have been communicated with are saying, we'll pull our memberships, we'll show up. Can you imagine what would happen unannounced if secretly all these progressive groups talked and everyone showed up at Washington for one day and flooded the streets with millions of people? Change would start to happen.
You would assume that the networks would report that, but I remember a thing back during the anti-war protest of Bush W, the second one. Everybody that Move On did a thing where everybody's supposed to call into your congressman, be polite, and say, I don't support the war in Iraq.
And crash the system.
It crashed the system for 8 hours in Washington, D.C.
And it wasn't reported.
It was not reported. I heard it one story on Yahoo. Yeah. One story, and that was it.
What you have to look at and understand is economic inequality leads to a broader, more general forms of power and control. Corporations have more control over us through, as I said, the 6 media outlets, the legislation that they want passed. We no longer have workers' rights. And I mean, even for me personally, I've changed my lifestyle and am working for a national chain that is terrible, and the pay is terrible. And I'm beginning to see how many people in this country are not surviving. They can't afford insurance because the $200 a month that they would have to pay in, no one in the family would get all the food they needed. People would go hungry. When people have car trouble, they barter saying, God damn, if you fix my car, I'll help you do this, because no one has money anymore. People are not aware because the media is not talking about. We are at so much of a huge gap of income inequality. And we have to get past all this media and all this politics and get back into social organizing, waking people up and going past the bullshit. Yeah, Trump says fake news. You goddamn right it's fake. It's manufactured.
I've got one for you. Okay. You remember during the Second Gulf War how it came out that the newspaper editors were real chummy with the president and they were planning stories, favorable stories for the administration? I just got through reading a book this week called Agent Zigzag. It was about a British double agent that was working with the Nazis or against the Nazis. And they had a thing of for a double agent to work, the Nazis had to believe that the double agent is doing sabotage in the British Isles. So they brought a magician in, and they basically converted a mosquito factory. It looked like it had been bombed out from the air.
Oh, yeah.
Did a great job. So they went to the newspaper and said, look, we need to say there was an air raid last night, massive damage, our mosquito plant's down. The London Times would not do it. They said, we are an independent news organization. If we do this one time, we have no more integrity left in our coffers. And they did not do it.
Wow.
Yes, they did not do it. Look how things have changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big change.
I think you're in it's the middle of the Battle of Britain. Britain is at the doorstep of being defeated, and the newspaper would not report a fake story about a bombing.
I've spent 15 years in the media business, both radio and print journalism. And I have seen things change where I'm no longer a journalist because I don't buy into that bullshit. And I began to see changes in that as early as 1980s, which during the Reagan administration, the Fairness Doctrine was overturned. But what I'm trying to say is you have to do your own research, and you cannot rely on mainstream media.
I finished another book this week too. It's called The Economic Singularity, and it's kind of a follow-up. They're not the same authors, but they go over the same topics of Rise of Robots. We recommend both those. They're excellent books. But they were saying, it was written in 15, 16. They said 80% of the news stories you see online, they're not even written by people. They have a computer program that does it. Yes,
software.
It pulls in the facts.
Yeah.
It goes through because
I believe that because of the way the syntax is.
Yes, the syntax.
It's like people aren't writing it.
It's getting better and better because before when they first started with voice recognition, they sat down. A programmer sat down and they tried they loaded a dictionary file. They loaded grammar rules, and you could tell it. It was just spitting it out. Yeah. But what Google does, the reason Google and Apple and all those people, when you do, okay, Google, and you ask Google something or you ask Siri something, the reason they provide that is they take all that data, everything you say to Google, and it's recorded, and it's parsed. And that data is sold to companies
Well, wait a second. Take that a step further. What did Snowden say? Remember the big deal that the government got a hold of a direct line into where everything was fed and put in their own line and was taking information without these media outlets knowing it. If you do not think that our government is not aware of everything that's fucking going on, you've had your head in the sand too long.
Okay, I read the Snowden book. Excellent book also. He goes, the reason that the rise of the tech in the United States in the last 20 years has been a boon for the government, because if Russia sends a fax or an email, more than likely it goes through our servers first in the United States, because we have such cutting-edge computer farms and server farms that even coming to the United States, going through our stuff and sending it back to Europe or somewhere in Russia is actually quicker than going through the European.
And who governs the media lines? The FCC.
Yeah, well, and when Snowden made these revelations, Silicon Valley, they had a hissy fit, because now you have people realizing that all their corporate secrets, all their bank transactions, it's going to United States Force. And guess what? Somebody's at the end of the line listening.
Sure. You were also talking about another book that we didn't get touched on, but we're going to add that to the notes, is The Rise of the Robots.
Excellent
Tell us
book.
a little bit about that book.
I use an example of all my children right now, they're taking robot classes. How to make robots, how to program robots. Automation. It's not a coming thing. It's already here. That anything that can be any kind of repetitive work is on these chopping block to become automated through robots, or just look at the OK Google. The phone understands you in a very the Alexa app over there. It takes your natural speech, drunken or not, and can usually 90% of the time, or 99% of the time, figure out what song you're listening, you're wanting. Calling tech support is not going to be a thing anymore, because either you're going to get like right now, I used to work at a call center. I worked for Hertz, and all that stuff has been farmed out to the Philippines and India and stuff like that. Well, those are going to get chopped too, because a computer program doesn't ask for days off. It doesn't have a bad day. It understands your natural language.
And you don't need to pay it.
And you don't need to pay it. Right.
Which goes back to the upper 10% of the capitalists are designing this through legislation, plans to take away. They are creating this income inequality.
Well, that's...
we have to know where it's coming from. We have the power to stop it if we rise up against it.
Well, you can't be a Luddite on it because it's coming.
Yeah.
But the...
we can slow it down.
Well, Bezos, though, the guy from... Oh, no, I'm sorry. Was it Bezos? I think is it Bezos has... one of the mega guys. They're amazing. Amazingly smart. I first heard of a guaranteed basic income from them. And I thought that was just silly. It's that silly. But then after I read Rise of the Robots, it makes a lot more sense. It's the automation, and this is from Rise of the Robots. He used an example of an alien race suddenly showing up on Earth on every continent, just landing. And you know what? They're not, but they're nice people. They're easy to get along with. Their whole thing is, I want to help you. I want to serve you. I don't want to get paid. I want to be here for you. So we bring them in and we start teaching them just simple tasks, like take care of my bank records, or order my dinner, or find the closest restaurant to me, and they love it. That's the only job that they love to do. They love helping you. Well, they do such a good job of that. Well, then they start helping your kids with their homework, and then they start designing computer programs, and then they start cleaning your house for you. At some point, anybody that's not working for the robots doesn't have a job.
Yeah.
What do you do then?
Yeah. That's going to have to be another podcast, because we haven't delved into that, and we need to.
Well, okay, imagine this. Okay, the automation. Google cars are coming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they've already got a Swedish company is already running trucking stuff in Arizona, full blown semis running routes. Now again, before you say, well, they're not ready for prime time. Well, they drove 1 million miles and they only got rear-ended one time, and that wasn't their fault. Or they've never had an accident that was significant or their fault.
Sure, and it is coming. I get it, but it will take another podcast to really to delve into who's going to be the workers. Now, I do want to bring up...
Look what Uber's doing. Look, did you see the Uber guy, the CEO, getting griped out by the guy? When he went into Uber, they were paying $20 a mile, and now they're paying $3 or something or $2.75 a mile.
Wow!
And the Uber CEO just lets go. I'm like, it's not my fault. You're the one who got you in this situation. Blah blah blah.
Well, he also wanted to take a position in Trump's administration, and then there was a backlash on Twitter, and people began
deleting their things. Yes.
Uninstalling their app. And when he saw how many millions of people were doing that, he changed his tune.
Well, even at that rate, I've taken an Uber car, and I have. It was a pleasant experience. But even then, they want it cheaper. And their they're already working on their own self-driving car. In fact, there's a lawsuit saying that one of the engineers stole some trade secrets from Google car or whatever. But yeah, I mean,
it's coming. No, it's coming,
and it's all your delivery stuff.
No, automation is coming. You're absolutely right.
Your mailman
it's going to change the society and the economy. The problem is, does the government have the foresight to get in front of this change and know that the current model is not going to work when this automation arrives?
I would like to say yes, but they've sure not come across that way before.
One of the news sources that I fully trust and has a long history of being a progressive magazine is called In These Times. It's a great magazine. Well, they have a new book that one of their editors have put together, and Verso Books is going to be coming out with this book at the end of March, 1st of April, and it's called The Age of Inequality. It's a 40-year investigation by In These Times. So a lot of what I'm talking about, what we've talked about in this podcast, I encourage you to get this book because you're going to see the 40-year history of how we're in the present situation. And we can get ourselves out of it.
I would differ with you about this 40-year mark. It's actually a lot older than that. The guy that invented the system we use to find our library books, Dewey.
Dewey Decimal?
His name was John Dewey, I believe.
Dewey Decimal.
Yeah.
Invented the Dewey Decimal.
Yeah, Dewey. I think his name was John Dewey, but he was in front of this public education thing back 100 and whatever years ago. And he made public statements to the effect, and I'm going to have to paraphrase them though, we don't want highly educated people, we want obedient workers.
Yes. I know several teachers, and they all say the same thing. It's red button, green button. That's what they want to turn on.
And that was back, over 100 years ago when they were inventing public education.
Sure. No, I mean, there is a longer history. But in these times, it will give you Noam Chomsky is part of it, Bernie Sanders, other writers. It will be a good reference book to acquaint yourself to a 40-year cycle in America of income inequality.
And you're right. It really, it started, the present system started about 40 years ago under the Nixon. And then that time period in the 70s, where they had all these consultants that kind of, consolidated all this, but it started way before them.
Sure. Well, I mean, there is more corruption, if not the same amount of corruption, in Washington today as there was in the 1900s when the Muckrakers started writing about the corruption. History repeats itself. Not only will it repeat itself, but we'll repeat ourselves. This is False Flag. Join us again next week for another installment of three guys sitting around and helping you awake to the false flags that are out there.
Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you for tuning into False Flag, the grassroots activism podcast where together we can change the world. Please like, comment, and subscribe.